It seems very efficient, said I, lying. I had come too far to see so little to make overmuch of it. What the thing was, you see, was only some queer backwater noodle house in someone's backyard looping out comic little pastas as slow as a wet week. Basic if lumpish product to be sold dry from drawers, only to be over-seasoned and twisted around in the local and surely indiscriminate platters of the neighbourhood. But what the deuce, it had colour and was magazine-worthy. If the dough here was humming with mites and animalcules, well, that was more Pastiche's worry than mine, thank you very much. Now he was popping hazelnuts. He's beautiful, yes? God, the Italian was such a... Yes, Mr. Scognizzo, said I, my eyeballs rolling skyward and sighing, it is beautiful, all right. Romantico. Romantic was hardly my word for the machine, as you can well imagine, eh? Romantico, repeated Scognizzo, winking. Provocante sensuale, mamma mia. He decided to pour it on. Stammi più vicino. Che begli occhi ce hai un sorriso stupendo. On my left side, he dodged around to my right. Are you take to celebración de pasta de fin de semana? No, yes, I don't know. What was he talking about? But it didn't matter. He saw he was getting nowhere. He had his goatskin cap or whatever slipped off, and with his hand was nervously combing back thick, pomaded shocks of hair. He raised his eyebrows and looked at me, I surmised, puppy-like. His throat ball bounced. He did a wee little jog in a circle and grabbed my arm. You, give me boogie-woogie? You say? We, you, me, you, two we. He began rubbing his two index fingers together side to side. You knows? Rapporti. Fog. Come the mink? You understand? We make the giampata hodja podja. My God, I realized. He hadn't been pointing to or talking about the machine or discussing the factory. He had been referring all along to himself. Well, I stand for no nonsense. Believe thee me, I gave him unshirted hell, I can tell you. How's that? I stamped my foot and abruptly marched away, notebook in hand, along with, should I have pointed this out to him, a sharpened pencil, to the outer drying rooms. I heard him further humiliate himself by clutching his hands at a semi-squat and crooning like a butcher bird and blubbering out things like "Fa l'amor" and "Just a bascio" and "I am good, beautiful, yes, no?" Funny, down on 42nd Street, I would have instantly vised somebody like that right in the gonads without blinking. I quick-flipped my pocket dictionary. All I could find in the back were common phrases, so pulled one out and snapped. "Esci se ne frega, who gives a damn?" I couldn't take that moony look and checked my book. "Sto per ammalarmi," I tried. "I am going to get sick." Nothing. "Mi fa cagar," it makes me puke. "Mi fa vomiter." The photographer telephoned from Rome, assuring me that he was on his way. "What's the name of your pension?" "Villagrasini," I replied. "Your connection there?" "A Guido." "Silence. That bad. If you took his brain and put it in a bird, it's going to fly backwards." A long excerpt there from the short story Scognizzo's Pasta Company, from the collection Early Stories by Alexander Theroux, published by Tough Poets Press. There'll be a link for the book in the description below. This was published in 2021 and is the first in three of a triad of short works from Theroux, beginning with Early Stories, then Fables, and then Later Stories. And as this was the first in the triad, I believe I'm right in thinking that it was the first fiction for 14 years of Theroux's to be published. I'm on a Theroux kick, as anyone who's been speaking to me will know. In short, even though these are the early stories before his, many of which there isn't dates here, there isn't this kind of biographical textual information about the origins of the stories or anything like an introduction. It goes straight into the story. So I am ignorant where the origins of each one of these and whether or not it was published in small presses or whatnot a long time ago. So as for the dates, whether or not which of these is prior to Three Wogs, which I previously reviewed, I am ignorant to that. But even at this very early stage of Theroux's writing career, there is clear nods, especially in the story, let me get this right, An English Railroad, specifically to the themes of Three Wogs. There's also Summer Bellerophon, or The Agonies of James Querpox, which is, as I understand it, is seemingly an early short rendition of Darkenville's Cat, which that book is very much on its way to me from the United States. It was a late Christmas present to myself. But as for early stories, in a sentence, I can say that it has been a long time, though the work of Thomas Bernhard did give me a form of Austrian, austere, and rather strict enjoyment with respect to Bernhard's often limited style, but enjoyment all the same. Theroux's writing is the first time in a long, long while that I have had what I would just describe as pure literary enjoyment from reading by anything short stories or books. He is a writer that thrives on language, on words, and so the stories here, and I'm generally fairly awful at summing up stories, and there's also other reasons for that with regard to Theroux. So from the publisher description that you'll find on Goodreads and in other places, we have the stories about a tourist discovers a modern Nestor in an English pub, an idealistic teacher who is also a broken-hearted lover leaves us speechless over his overwhelming fixation. That is the story Summer Bellerophon, which is one of the highlights of the book. A hidebound feminist goes to Italy to learn pasta making. That is from the story Scodnizzo's Pizza Company, which I read the excerpt from. What else do we have? What is the effect of summer camp on a sensitive youngster, which is the tale called Black Robe, which is about a very sensitive, lonely young man attending a rather austere Catholic summer camp. Copernicus End of a comic farce. Does a young boy with a genius IQ fulfill his promise, which is one of the more developed and solemn tales in the book, in the collection. And what happens when a collector discovers the rarest autograph in American letters, which ends with a parrot shitting all over the autograph. There is wit, there is skill, there is style, and there is an unapologetic form of extremely intelligent offense. And I'm not talking about modern-day Jimmy Carr, stand-up comedian, Ricky Gervais, awful, rather boring and transparent offense. And I'm not talking about anything that is particularly cruel or harsh or horrible or anything like that. What Theroux does in each of these tales, each of these stories, is from this foundation of what really anyone who begins to read Theroux can then describe as a Thoreauian love of language, which has been famously described as a Victorian attic of words and phrases and linguistics, etc., and jargon. Beginning from this foundation with this clear, unapologetic, this is unapologetic literature, unapologetic love of language and contextual language and neologisms and terms and jargon, which is contextual, builds up plot and world from a character. For Theroux, character is plot. If a character is well developed in contextually within their setting with regards to the language, with regards to the place, and the language with respect to their place, the plot unfolds naturally from this character, from that character that has been defined by this language. And so what is built is a sort of what comes to mind is actually the term ribbing, where you sort of jab someone in the ribs and really, or a noogie, you grab a teenager and noogie them and annoy them and frustrate them. There is an annoy, like a real desire for Theroux to prod and poke and rib the reader into engaging in this sort of frolic of language, in this frolic of offense, and this very intelligent, ultimately political incorrectness, which is playing on culture in an extremely loving way. And with regards to these stories, one person who I've already mentioned, actually, that I would put Theroux alongside, not in terms of style, again, not necessarily possibly in terms of theme, but in terms of how the form culminates into something larger. And the writer I'm thinking of is Thomas Bernhard. So in Bernhard's fiction, you find seemingly you find outrage, you find cynicism, you find annoyance at society, you find annoyance at anything that is punching down, you find a deep dislike of base, boring, asinine culture. Equally, you find this in Theroux when he's jabbing at gender or race or literature or culture in general or society in general or lust and love were common themes. The great irony of both of these writers is that in their continual appreciations of the minutiae details of all of these different forms of linguistically contextual life that we're finding is actually a deep love of this outrage, a deep love of the ridiculousness of this. Theroux certainly does have a protagonist type. They're usually someone who is above, there's someone who is elevated, there's someone who's intelligent and erudite and articulate. But all of this really is ultimately second to Theroux's just Theroux's dynamic, theatrical, not bombastic, and exquisite ability as a stylist. I have a lot of excerpts. I will go to one more from the Railroad. For those of you that this is from an English Railroad, the story, and for those of you that watched my Three Wogs review, some of this may seem fairly like that. He finished his martini and gulped the olive. I miss the Cheltenham Flyer, made the fastest railway run in the world. I'll rub it up. Staff-like family, silver service, piping hot, crested plates. Background sound of rattling cutlery and tinkling glasses as the train sped through the countryside. A shaft of midday sun that lit the white tablecloth and glittered on the cutlery. Stewards all attentive to one's needs and right at hand. They were efficient, smiling, kept pads, wrote it all down, wet the pencil tip. Blacks who can write nowadays are as rare as snow leopards. It was, "Morning, sir, a little more Dundee cake," or "May I adjust the footrest, madam?" or "Would you like the new Strand magazine, sir?" They saw to all the luggage, provided foot warmers, hot towels, cigars. They wore white gloves, but were not permitted to sport a boutonniere. Wear satin-faced coats, wear patent leather shoes, or use cologne. No alarums and excursions at the stage direction goes. If you get my drift. White passengers only. No bank holiday rail chaos. Britain's dining cars have died a sad death. And so much like Nabokov, and Theroux, in my opinion, is up there with Nabokov, he's up there with Gass, he's up there with McCarthy and Pynchon, he's up there with the best as a stylist, is this reminiscent of something like Lolita or Pale Fire, this intricate ability as a stylist to roll the reader into a literary furor and dance of ability that is peppered with moments of serious, sincere and biting social criticism that one has sort of fallen into this railroad, or fallen into this bar chat with this basically racist bigot English chap. Now, there are moments of solemnness, there are moments of sorrow, there are moments of tragedy. But perhaps one of the, some would say frustrations, some would say tricky stances of Theroux's writing, especially in this collection, is the question of whether or not, one, the plots of these short stories are really plots at all. And this in turn connects to whether or not anything is really being said. Now, I don't mean to say that these are entirely empty or void of actual content with respect to ongoings. There are clear things happening, specifically, take for instance Scugnizzo's Pizza Company. The female protagonist, feminist journalist, is writing a piece on this pizza company, and then is coming to blows with both the owner and the pasta making machine. These things are happening, but ultimately one feels at all times that these plots are natural in the sense that we probably aren't going to get an ending. We're not going to get some conclusion that really teaches anything. And that's the specific thing, is that the prose and the literature is one of a certain excess, possibly even something like a pure excess, where the literature and the prose is for its own sake. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. My favorite writers, McCarthy, Gaddis, Bernhard, Yegi, all are of this flavor where prose really stands at form over function the majority of the time. Gas as well. And this is, I think, one of the frustrations for many readers reading many of the reviews, is whether or not these stories really actually have plots. Sometimes the threads of the plots are very difficult to pull out, and Theroux is getting lost at times, seemingly getting lost. But it's, if you can place yourself just into that zone of pure enjoyment, then what opens up is a book of stories where you just place yourself within a context for a certain amount of time and enjoy the world that has been built from an extremely learned and appreciative love of language. So take, for instance, excerpt from another one of the stories, A Wordstress in Williamsburg. She was exacting, finicky, fussy, what the French call difficile, and in a very real sense distinctly outmoded, a person from the bygone era of Squib toothpaste, Lux toilet soap, Ronald Colman movies, the 12-cylinder Franklin, Atwater Kent radios, and squat cap-sealed beer cans, not that she ever deigned to imbibe, and certainly not cans of common workaday beer. I believe she came from the era of automobiles with running boards, mud scrapers, celluloid windshields, and a folding entrance step. She spoke of dame schools, referred to her razors as Indian rubbers, would only eat Wolf River apples, referred to yeast as salaratus, lauded the designs of Lily Darche, and to her fish meant only cod. Haddock in her day was given away as trash. She wore gloves, kept fire screens at home, waited until men opened doors, left calling cards, and kept an old-fashioned Tiffany lamp in her front hall, right by a silver dish for mail. She hummed melodies from The Merry Widow, loved the poems of Bliss Carman, went on at length about frozen pudding ice cream, an outdated flavour, and lamented the disappearance of lyceums. She was a formalist, critic, and a traveller. I was raised to eat at a table with an attorney. I heard Miss Sweetshrub tell one of the girls there when the subject of antiquity came up, as often it did that day. A silver one, mind you, not a glass one, with some households chose. Mother thought having a glass one slightly, and I agree, slightly misquin. She sighed and raised a shaky hand that showed the Venetian architecture of a willow leaf that touched her brow in a piteous lament for all of us moderns. You will not have heard of them today, I dare say. It served for side dishes, fruit or sweetmeats, saved on passing dishes around as is commonly done nowadays. She also had what could be called a tiptoeing voice. But what is common, we avoid. And we're given just this character, and from Miss Sweetshrub's, this Wordstress in Williamsburg's, from her as she is, the plot unfolds just in an ultimate engagement and a love of literature, and a love of, once again, language. And there's a sort of friction for me here with respect to how I could really review the book, because in going into each one of the stories, pulling out the plot, saying this is beginning, middle, and end, you're not going to get much from that. This is writing for people who love language, writing for people who love prose, like writing for people who want to see what style can do. And so this for me is literature at its best, because it's not reliant on artificially inserted gestures of ultimately morals. The characters certainly are built and constructed in such a way that they would have their own morals, which are in that cynical Therouxian way are basically derided consistently. I mean, Theroux seems to have somewhat of a dislike of many of the characters that he's written, and is using them as set pieces to bring about an understanding and a criticism of the relatively asinine society that we inhabit. But at the same time, much like that Nabokovian sense, one is pulled into just these moments of pure literary enjoyment. But when we go through to Black Robe, which was once again the tale of a young, sensitive and relatively lonely young man attending a Catholic summer camp, this is where we find more of the solemn moments, and Theroux's ability against his, once again, I guess, comedy and tragedy. If there is such a thing as Therouxian wit, which is complete with this Victorian attic of language, and a rather, ultimately it's one of the sharpest wits I've read in literature, then if we have, instead of comedy and tragedy, we have wit and sorrow, wit and loneliness, maybe. But there are these perfect moments of sorrow, beginning with two excerpts from Black Robe. And this little excerpt is actually my favorite from the whole book. I can honestly say that most of the time I lived a dream life. So many times I saw people, strangers, passers-by, and out of nowhere thought, I'll never ever see that person again. Everyone always walked in different directions in the world, lost to logic or loyalty or luck. What was fleeting was temporary, and anything temporary broke my heart. Nothing one experienced ever remained permanent or recoverable. I realized with melancholy, not the moment, not the place, nothing. Whatever it was we encountered or happened to pass by was immediately and forever in the past. It was so strange that the things I longed for had nothing to do with the future. I always looked into the past. I pondered in consequence, and with mad concentration, the way things used to be. I was always wasting my time as a young boy trying to squint back through space and time or some dimension, making an effort to look into and then past crowded neighborhoods and urban blight and city blocks in an attempt to see, as if by way of photographs, the ghosts of the past. I would sometimes look at a point in a painting or an aerial on a house or a certain word in a book and think, I'm the only one in the entire world looking at this right now. No one else. And then again, from 250, is in the same story. We've moved from that solemnness with this, once again, this sensitive young man into something notably Therouxian, which is a passage that includes really an excuse to list things. There's always this encyclopedia in the background, always this dictionary in the background. I wanted to be an author, mostly because, at least to me, writing books with quills by flickering candlelight seemed to be about the best thing a person could do, no matter what, and also, I think, at least partially, because I also had the same first name as the French author, Alexandre Dumas. I once made a list. It included all the things I could think of and was entitled Things in Nature That Hurt. Sun glare, jellyfish, horseradish, hot peppers, locust bark, poison ivy, yucca plants, dry ice, stinging nettles, snakes, an echidna, onions, rhubarb leaves, mosquito bites, African thorn trees, thorns, hail, hornpouts, which is fish with spines, wolverines, bluefish teeth, sea urchins, spiny-backed orb weavers. Camp food dorked. We marched to the dining hall every morning to a march by John Philip Sousa called Fairest of the Fair, an old scratch 78 RPM record playing on a Victrola up in the wooden fire tower and blasted over a loudspeaker. I remember at breakfast watery scrambled eggs and rubbery pancakes and clogged syrup pourers and the cool scent of pine blowing through morning windows thrown wide open. Gilday once winkled some silverware from which he fashioned long spears to fight saber-toothed tigers. We left messages in the woods by shaping tree limbs. Tapioca pudding we called fish eyes, donuts, shot puts, apples, Mrs. Beeb's bubbies, and certain white, round, dessert dry old New England cross crackers that they gave us, which were impossible to eat with peanut butter without strangling, we called hockey pucks. Fittler used to walk around holding crackers up to his ears, goofily mocking Horatio now, repeating, "Red sails in the sunset." They were so dry that even 2 dinners Buffrin wouldn't eat them. So we move between basically perfectly crafted moments of often sorrow and loneliness and solitude within a certain appreciation of the world into these moments of enjoyment. And the moments of enjoyment are usually with other people. There's a lot of naming conventions. There's a lot of sort of, if we have such a thing as Pincheronian names, there's also Therouxian names, like one of the final story, Chosen Loxley swims the Tiber. Someone, Summer Bellerophon is another. This whole thing is held together, I think. Much of the writing here is held together. If we're to focus on, once again, what I've already said, that the stories are encapsulations and small capsules of literary language-based context within a time, within a certain place, complete with that time's place and jargon, equally bringing in an elevated protagonist who can sort of, in a way, control and see from a top-down over point of view that those connections and that meta language. Equally in there is a dialect, and with that, much like Bernhard, I think, is a love of that form of community that comes from that. It's a strange, cynical, offensive form of love, but it's always endearing towards the things that it's prodding and poking at. I'll give one short excerpt actually from the story Summer Bellerophon, and if I can find it, and then finish up. Yes, Summer exuberated. One second, let me jump back a bit. At one point, Geraldine Oikel, her hair up in vise-type Medusa braids, a girl who thought if you ate your food in the dark, you would not put on weight, commonly asked Summer if she would like a blueberry-filled donut. Like so many others, Geraldine had a crush on her. Want a powdery one? Yes, Summer exuberated. It was the very first word Queerpox ever watched her say. Watched, that is, because over a stairway he tightly held both of his ears with an almost crazed anticipation lest he hear her speak and break the spell. Summer usually ate with her friends upstairs in roped dining halls with its drab WPA mural of chaotic green Babylonian grapevines curling up painted Corinthian columns. Situated at a distance, he habitually watched Summer eat, always delicately with precise finger and thumb, as on this day, with one hand resting in her lap on a striped apron of mattress ticking she had worn from her art class and her work at the kiln. As he watched, he heard the metallic cut-glass jingle of a goldfinch's rapid chirps with sounds like the bird was quietly saying, "Potato chip," with a very even cadence. Summer had got powdered sugar on her cheek from the donut, which made her suddenly bend forward with laughter as she removed it quickly with a flash of a yellow and blue handkerchief. Her laughter had the ripple wash sound among stones among a blue running brook. She was perfection. She imprinted his rare imagining. It was heaven. It was impossible. It was hell. It was a moment filled with dizzy confusion and an almost completely unbearable, unsurpassable joy. This is very much a Nabokovian story of trying to wrestle with the point of view in a certain sense. But to give another example from Summer Bellerophon of this specifically dialect and the enjoyment of dialect. Play stopped for a moment. He watched Summer sip water from a ladle. Zizenia voda, the water of life. Aqua vita, vodka, dear little water. My water, my life, my vodka. Summer Bellerophon was as graceful as a silver poplar, fruit-globed, chatoyant, shining in his dreams, unfolding and unfolding, petal by petal, waxen and immaculate. Vodka, he whispered. Can observation affect and determine our realities? Was it possible indeed, was it true, that what cannot be observed should therefore not be an ascribed reality? Chance, indeterminacy, and probability began to supplant certainty in the conjectures that poor querulous Querpox tortuously began to devise that involved, by way of fantasy, various means by which the two of them might be together. A tomorrow now began fully to mean life itself for him. Querpox listened to their squeals as they ran the field, hockey sticks clicking and clacking, loud imprecations, laughter, groans, laughing and shouting. He marvelled at the Hermetic language that the girls used. In their refectory, their conversations floated on a sea of slang and informal speech by prep school patois. The interlocutory school chats they engaged in seemed a language all of its own. Most of the grey bar hall girls spoke mainly in particles, or so it seemed. Well, like, anyway, totally, so, okay, really, actually, honestly, literally, in fact, at least, I mean, quite, of course, after all, hey, sure enough, know what I mean? Just saying. A vernacular of endearing back-chat filled with clicks, coos, and enclitics that, in a sort of breathless racing way, streaking and scuttling, fairly seemed briskly to hop over nouns and verbs in order to give voice to an already shared understanding. So, that section as a sort of ending is an encapsulation of the point that I take from the stories. These are early stories. The reviews that I have read, who have read more through than me, made it clear that these are, I don't want to call them attempts, it'd be kind of rude, but early, obviously they're early stories, likely prior to Three Wogs and then Darkenville's Cat, etc. And so, as to the depth, which is there at times, but really that last passage, this agreed upon language, agreed upon dialect, and agreed upon context, is the plot that connects to the characters and unfolds, again, with a connection to just pure literary enjoyment. And there isn't any stories here that really fail. There's none that I felt were flat. This isn't a criticism, but it is a statement about this, that even though it's short stories, collections of short stories are usually easy and quick to read. This isn't an easy read, as you might have gathered from the excerpts that I've read out. There is an enjoyable difficulty to the sentence structure, to the alliteration, to once again something closest to Nabokovian. But in that difficulty, in that challenge, in that sort of marathon-like enjoyment of endurance, something is just absolutely like a frolic, like a dance. And this is very much, Theroux is very much someone to sit down with like a cigar and or a wine and just thoroughly enjoy, for the prose, for the love of language, for the love of writing, and for the love of words and dialect, and once again just enjoyment. And less to say, I imagine, about the early stories than I will about Darkenville's Cat and the rest when they arrive. But undoubtedly, I imagine, review, if not all, the majority of Theroux's works on this channel, because as far as a living, if you'd have asked me, when was it, 2 years ago, who's the greatest living author, it would have, of course, been Cormac McCarthy. If you ask me now and you push Theroux's name out of the hat, I would struggle to really. No name would immediately pop into my mind with any immediate with any haste. Maybe William T. Volman. But outside of that, Thomas Pynchon, still alive, hasn't published in a long time, and of a certain era where John Barth passed away very recently. So, but Theroux is in the runnings now for that, for the greatest living author, which is strange for having read so very little. But it's the playfulness, the enjoyment is very much needed. and the playfulness and enjoyment at times. I don't really want to say it about the early stories because I don't know enough of the context, and I don't know what Theroux's own. I mean, he's had them published, so I assume he's still fairly fond of them. But certainly with Three Wolves, and certainly with other things that small bits I've read here and there, it is a leisure and enjoyment of language which borders on something sacred. And Theroux, in one interview, has said that to write in this is to paraphrase, but to write is to continue the work of the evangelicals, to evangelize as a grace. And so that there is very sincerely the enjoyment and respect and love of literature is heightened to such a degree that it actually, this is going to sound like complete highfalutin, but it borders on something closing in on what it is to engage with something linguistically sacred. Something is treated with such a reverence and respect and love that you can't help just falling into its grace and its sort of ice skating like swiftness and ability. And I don't really say any of that lightly, because it all does sound a little bit ridiculous when I say it like that. But yeah, so I will say no more other than pick this up. It's from Tough Poets Press is the only place. Well, you can get it wherever it's being sold, but that's Alexander Theroux, Early Stories by Tough Poets Press. I'll put the links in the description below. They aren't sponsoring me for this, but it is a small press, so support them. Yeah, and other than that, go read whatever Theroux you can find, and thanks for listening.